Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in Mark chapter 3. We're going to be starting verse 2 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, as we began last lesson, we saw that chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, deals with Jesus doing another miracle on the Sabbath day. And this miracle was where he healed the man with the withered hand. And we also said that in these verses of Scripture, there were two different kinds of people in this place and in the synagogue. And the first was the man with the withered hand. And secondly, we saw that it was the people with the withered hearts. And last lesson, we looked at the man with the withered hand. And now we're going to start verse 2, and we're going to take a look at the people that had the withered hearts. So he says here, actually, let's read verse 1, and it says, and he entered again into this, actually it says in the Greek, a synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. Now, verse 2 begins, the people with the withered hearts. And their lifelong withered hearts caused them to cast accusations at Jesus rather than to honor him and to praise him. And of course, the people with the withered hearts can be found where? In the church. In the church. As this man with the withered hand was in the church, and we said last lesson that in the churches today, there are people with withered hands. There are Christians today that used to be on fire for God. They used to serve God. They used to love God. And maybe they still do to an extent. But something happened in their life, and their hand has withered. Their hand is the right hand of faith that reaches out and grabs the promises of God has withered for whatever reason. And they can be found in the church. But also there are people in the churches today with withered hearts. And there are always those who will find fault. And they don't feel fulfilled in life until they are finding fault with someone or something. And they can be found in the church also. It all goes back to Satan's temptation of Eve, where he said, you shall be as gods. And even 6,000 years later, people want to be their own gods, judging for themselves and judging other people. And the deception of sin is so bad. The deception of sin is so bad that finite man now finds fault with an infinite God. Finite man, puffed up in pride, puffed up in arrogance, infected with the nature of the one who deceived us. Now we've been deceived, and now a finite man finds problems and finds faults with an infinite God. Our parents were deceived by Satan, and Satan's nature was passed down to us. Again, we call it self-enthronement. Self-enthronement. That's what Satan wanted to do in eternity past. He wanted to sit upon the throne of God and receive worship like God. And that's one of the sins that that's one of the areas that Satan deceived Eve with. You shall be as God. You can make your own decisions for yourself. The withered heart causes spiritual blindness, which causes no love for Jesus and no sympathy for the works that Jesus does. They had no sympathy for what Jesus was going to do on the Sabbath day. Their only desire was to see the Sabbath fulfilled. That's what they wanted to see. They didn't care if this man had a withered hand on the Sabbath day and if it got healed or not. So now in verse 3 it says, "And Jesus said unto the man which had the withered hand, Stand forth. Stand forth." Now, the Greek here for stand forth means that Jesus wanted this man to stand up right in front of everyone, to be right out into the open. Jesus is going to, he just didn't say, "Hey, back there in the 15th row, I see you got a withered hand. Could you stand up back?" No. Jesus is calling him up. Jesus is calling him up to the front. He wants him to stand forth. He didn't say stand up. He said stand forth. That means come on up here right in front of everybody. All right. Verse 4, "And Jesus said unto them, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill?" But they," meaning his accusers, "they held their peace." Now, the question being asked here by Jesus is healing permitted on the Sabbath day? Is healing permitted on the Sabbath day? And there are three answers to this question according to Jewish law. Now, the first answer to this question is healing allowed on the Sabbath day? Is number one, healing on the Sabbath in order to save a person's life is seen as a duty. You should do it. Number two, caring for someone who is seriously ill, that where their illness affects the whole body, is also allowed, but there are certain guidelines to be kept. Number three, treating minor sicknesses is not allowed because most of the treatments for these sicknesses require the medicine to be ground up. And grinding was not allowed because it was considered as a form of work. So, was it according to the law to save a life on the Sabbath day? Is it okay to heal on the Sabbath? It is if a person's life is in jeopardy. But if it's just a sickness, you got a cold or the flu, whatever, wasn't allowed. All right, wasn't allowed to deal with those kinds of minor illnesses. Now, if we also include Matthew's account and Luke's account of this healing here, we see that Jesus gives 5 arguments against the way that the Pharisees used the Jewish law. All right, 5 arguments that Jesus gives. You don't see it here in the Gospel of Mark, but we have to go to Matthew also, and Matthew and Luke. So it says here in number 1, 5 arguments. In Matthew chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, it says, "And he said unto them, What man shall there be among you that shall have 1 sheep, and if that sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold of it and lift it out?" Okay, then verse 12 says, "How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore is it lawful to do well on the Sabbath days?" Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. So, in Matthew 12, 11 and 12, Jesus argues that doing good deeds on the Sabbath is more important than the Sabbath work rules. And the Pharisees, basically what Jesus is saying, that the Pharisees need to get their priorities in order. Number two, the second argument Jesus gives is in Matthew 12, verses 11 and 12, that if it is okay to rescue a sheep on the Sabbath, then how much more is it okay to heal someone on the Sabbath? The third argument Jesus gives on the Sabbath, on doing this healing on the Sabbath, is seen in Mark chapter 2, verse 27. And it says, "And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." Now, so this third argument is that the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. God gave the Sabbath to serve and to benefit man, not to enslave him to rules and regulations. God gave the Sabbath for man to rest and to be refreshed and to spend that time with God, not to be burdened with rules and regulations. Number four, the fourth argument we see in John chapter 5, verses 17 and 18, and it says, "But Jesus answered them, My Father works hitherto, and I work. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God." So this fourth argument is that Jesus claimed divinity, and the Pharisees knew it. Therefore, Jesus had a right to work on the Sabbath. If Jesus is God, then he has a right to work on the Sabbath. And they knew he was claiming to be God. They knew it. But yet they didn't believe that he was. So Jesus said, if my Father works hitherto and I work, and if Jesus is one with God, then he has a right to heal and do whatever he wants on the Sabbath. Number five, the fifth argument is seen in John 7. John chapter 7, verses 22 and 23. And it says here, "Moses therefore gave unto you circumcision, not because it is of Moses, but because it's of the fathers. And ye on the Sabbath day, you do circumcise a man. If a man on the Sabbath day receives circumcision, that the law of Moses should not be broken, are you angry with me because I have made a man every whit whole on the Sabbath day?" So this fifth argument that Jesus gives is that if the Pharisees allow circumcision on the Sabbath, then how much more a healing on the Sabbath? Because God in the law said that on the 8th day, the son should be circumcised on the 8th day. And if the 8th day falls on the Sabbath, then the Pharisees believe has to be. In order to keep the law of Moses, we have to circumcise on the Sabbath day, regardless. So what Jesus is saying is, if you're willing to do a work on the Sabbath day, which is circumcision, then I should be able to heal on the Sabbath day. Now, the Pharisees' guidelines for the Sabbath, generally, their guidelines are good, but they shouldn't be a burden to man. Some circumstances allow for the breaking of these rules in order to do the will of God. And that's what they're saying. Some circumstances should be allowed in order to do the will of God on the Sabbath day. And this man had a withered hand, and he was in church that day. He was in the synagogue. Now, whether he was there to be healed, the Bible doesn't say. It doesn't say if he came there specifically to be healed or not. But he came to church that day. He went to the synagogue. And he wanted to he wanted to hear Jesus speak. And Jesus saw him, and he brings him up forward, and then he asks these questions. Now we're going to get into verse 5. We're going to get into verse 5 next lesson. But we're going to see what happens in this the healing of this withered man, and how the Pharisees react to it. All right? But until next lesson, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.